Assassin's Creed Shadows has done something peculiar with RPG storytelling that sounded like a bad idea at first, but now comes across as something I would consider essential for many, if not most, Western RPGs, a canon story mode. Now, on the surface level, this seems like a largely negative change. Taking away all the player choice means that a player is more likely to get disengaged from the narrative, as the fate of the characters don't depend on them. That level of immersion to shape the world around your choices is the defining feature of many RPGs such as Mass Effect. But after playing Assassin's Creed Shadows canon mode, I've come to a realization about how much more effective the story is when I'm not in control. See, everyone makes decisions a little differently in games. Some of us pick the straight-laced and good guy option, some of us want to see how depraved a game will allow us to be, and some of us try and roleplay a certain archetype or character. For me, I've always tried to pick what I think would be the best story. What choice would have the most satisfying narrative consequences and create an interesting tale, rather than a perfect one. However, this philosophy has often gotten me into trouble, because as the player, I lack a critical aspect in order to write the story: foresight. Just because I make a choice doesn't mean that my character is going to succeed at what I want them to do, often seen in me failing skill checks. But while I have no way of knowing how my choices will turn out, the writer of the story does, and that makes them the best person to make the decisions, as they're intimately familiar with the world and characters. This is especially helpful in RPGs with a character protagonist rather than a player vessel. See, when I'm playing as a predetermined character, even ones with no background lore, there are absolutely choices you can make that don't fit in with who you are. For example, any game that lets you abandon innocent people or decide to walk away from a situation. It's in the very nature of a video game protagonist to answer the call to adventure, so by having them behave in such a detached manner is extremely out of character for a living resident in their world. This is true for Naue and Yasuke, two characters with deeply held morals and philosophies, extremely so in Naue's case. When you're dealing with a character who has a conviction as strong as hers, it's imperative that you don't deviate from it, as that would weaken her moral stance. Much in the same way that The Last of Us Part 2 doesn't let you be merciful, as that's a betrayal of who Ellie is in that game. So by giving us choices like sparing our enemies, it makes Naue's potent rage feel weaker and not blinded by hate like she should be. Yasuke similarly is a man of great respect and restraint, so playing him as a vengeful and bloodthirsty Ronin isn't conducive to the narrative of the game. These personalities don't come from the player, they come from the writer and are grafted onto the core beliefs of these characters, making it awkward for the player to control their choices, as they are so well defined that there are clearly wrong choices to make. So by trusting the writer to make these choices for us, it removes the chance of the player messing up in the story and creating something that would stick out as wildly inconsistent in a totally linear narrative. While games like Elder Scrolls and Baldur's Gate have protagonists that serve as conduits for the player, meaning there's no inconsistent or wrong choice unless you're role-playing, but my argument isn't that choices in games are bad, or even that you should play the canon mode to get the real story, but there should be a real story, for no other reason than it would make the sequels better games. Right now, we're in a nebulous state, wondering what the canon endings for Mass Effect 3 and Cyberpunk 2077 were, as we speculate on which timeline the sequels will follow, as the writers of these types of games often come to the wrong decision of trying to please everyone. You can't write a sequel to a story that doesn't have a definitive ending. This is why Bethesda swaps to a new setting with every game, so that they're not bound by the consequences of their old ones, and why Ghost of Yotei isn't following the tale of Jin. Most games simply say that the best ending was the canon one and go from there, but there's hundreds of choices that a player makes across a game, and a sequel only referencing 2 or 3 of them feels insulting to all the work you put into a game. So by having a canon timeline, it creates a singularity that the writers can build off of, allowing for more creative freedom in the sequel. It also incentivizes replay, something Choices Matter RPGs are built on, as once you see the canon ending, you can then begin to experiment with the world and play around with the dialogue. Going into Assassin's Creed Shadows, I was certain that the dual protagonists would be the most intriguing narrative element, but this canon mode has provided an elegant solution to a problem many RPG sequels are now facing, and I think it should at least be an option in most RPGs moving forward. For more choices-based essays, here's one on what the hardest decisions I've ever had to make in games are, and I'll be back in 2 days.